Welcome to the Christmas Guest Assimilation webinar. We're going to get started here in just about a minute, but we've still got some folks logging on. I want to let you know there should be like a questions button somewhere. I'm running this solo today. I don't have any of my other teammates on with me, so I'm going to be answering the questions at the end, but I probably won't see them until the end. So. But go ahead and as you have questions, feel free to put them in the questions spot, and I will get to them when we get to the end. So it is 11 o'clock, and I want to honor you guys this time, so we'll go ahead and get started. This is going to be recorded, so if anybody misses this or has to log off a little early, we will email you a link to the recording tomorrow, I think, is when that will get sent to you, along with notes and some other stuff. So want to get started this morning with this. Well, maybe this surprising fact. Did you know all the data suggests that 5% of the people in your sanctuary on any given Sunday identifies as a guest? 5% of the people sitting in the pews or in your chairs on a Sunday morning, on any Sunday morning, will identify themselves as a guest. That's a bigger number. What this means is that if you have an average of 200 people in your church, if that's your average weekly attendance, you'll have approximately 520 guests in any given year. That's a lot. That's a lot of guests. And so you can actually use this general rule of thumb to let you know whether or not you have a front door or a back door problem, right? If you're not hitting that 5% number on a regular basis, which means you actually have to be tracking how many guests you have. But if you're not hitting that number on a regular basis, that means you're not attracting enough new people to even hit sort of the national average. But if you're hitting that but you're not growing at all, not that you would keep all 5%, but if you're not getting anywhere close to that, that shows that you probably have a backdoor problem where people really aren't, to use Larry Osborne's term, and I'm going to use this term quite a bit today, this idea of stickiness, right? People aren't sticking to your church. And so if we assume that the 5% number is accurate for the average church, how is your church doing right now? In fact, I've got a little poll. I'm going to ask you, how is your church doing right now at getting people to stick at your church? So you guys can go ahead and answer that, but just think about it. If you were doing a better job of connecting with that average 5%, imagine the growth that you might have at your church, right? Do the math. So it's likely that regardless of whether or not you believe that 5% number as a general rule of thumb, it's likely that you're going to beat that 5% average at Christmas time, whether it's at your Christmas Eve service or, with Christmas Eve being on a Sunday this year. I don't know how your church is doing services, handling that, but whatever that event is, you're probably going to have more than 5% of the people in that room are going to identify as a guest. Looks like most of you are saying that guests occasionally become regulars, and this is what we would expect, right? That sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. And so that's the whole point of why we're doing what we're doing today. 80% of you guys, by the way, said that guests occasionally become regulars, with the second highest being guests rarely become regulars. And so we want to teach you a process for helping more of that and it not being sort of on accident. We need to beat the backdoor problem with a proactive solution. And so our answer to that is a 10-step assimilation plan. But briefly, a little bit about me if you've not seen me before. Some of you, I noticed, were on our webinar last time, so you are a little bit familiar with me, or I've talked with you before in the past. But my name's Scott Ball, and I've got over 10 years of experience working on church staff in a variety of settings. So if you're in a rural church, I want you to know that this stuff works for you because I've been where you're at and I know what it's like. I've worked in a large church, so I know what all the nuances of what that's like to be on a multi-staff deal with lots of people. And I've also worked on a shoestring budget in a church plant. I was number 2 guy at a church that grew pretty quickly that we planted. And so I know kind of the ins and outs of that. So I can feel like I can relate to a lot of different contexts, although every church is unique, right? Every church is different. My master's is from Gordon Conwell. The focus of my studies was leadership, church leadership, and church planting. And I'm married. I've got 2 kids. They're bigger than that, but I love that picture. We're way overdue for new pictures, but I just love that one. And I've been working with the Malphurs group as a church strategy and leadership consultant for the last 2 years or so, a little bit coming up on more than that now, and just love it. Love doing this. It's a real great opportunity for me to speak from my own experiences in ministry, both successes and mistakes, to use the studies I have and the gifts that the Lord has given me. I just absolutely love this. I live for this. So I'm excited about this morning. The question is, how can we beat this backdoor problem? And I believe that we need to use a defined strategic workflow. So a couple of notes before we get started on this. This isn't just like a Christmas assimilation plan. You can actually use this all year round. But now is really the perfect time to start. If you don't have a really clearly defined plan, then this is a good time to execute one and to form one. The other thing I want to say is that you're going to need to contextualize this to your ministry. So I'm going to give you a framework, and then you're going to need to adapt it for your context, for your culture, for the volunteer structure that you have. Please feel free to take this. And if you go, no, I don't think that will quite work at our church, it might not. So you're going to need to take this to your team and talk about it with them. So the first question is sort of, what is a workflow? It's basically the sequence of processes through which a piece of work passes from initiation to completion. So here's basically what usually happens. I'm going to use my wonderful artistic skills here. Lots of times the church will have a connect card or something like that. Let's see how well are you guys going to be able to see this. Church will have like a connect card. And sometimes that connect card goes to the senior pastor. Sometimes that it goes to a secretary. Sometimes it goes to somebody else. And then from there, the question is, what happens? Right? What happens after that? What happens to the connect card? Is the senior pastor going to phone call some people? Well, what happens if life gets busy? What happens when somebody dies, or there's a wedding coming up, or he's got to write a sermon? If it's going to the secretary, what else is she doing? Like, is there an actual system, or is it sometimes something happens with the connect card, or sometimes it doesn't? Or maybe you're thinking, no, we're really good about that. We get the connect card, it goes to somebody, and then we do something with it. But then lots of times that's where it ends. Like, we did the phone call, we sent the email, we did whatever, and we're still not having any good results. And so I just want to say we need to solve that problem. So a workflow is basically saying we need to develop a system of steps so that we're not starting with a connect card, we're starting with a connection with a person, with a real human being, and we're moving them and progressing along in a relationship with them, so that the ultimate goal is that they want to continue to have a relationship with us in our church long term. That's the goal. And so we're managing that through a series of steps. That's what a workflow is about. It's what most churches don't have or don't execute on. And so that's what we're teaching today. So what we want to do is we want to input names. Step one, we're going to input names and contact information into a database or spreadsheet for tracking. Okay, so this seems really basic, but lots of times this is where a breakdown is. Okay, so you have the connect card. Hopefully you have one. I've worked with several churches that don't even have a connect card, and that's a problem. So you got to start with having some sort of a piece of a document, something really short that guests fill out. But then you got to do something with it, like assuming they even fill it out, which is a challenge in and of itself. What happens to that? Does it get placed in the offering basket? Lots of times the church will say, hey, we don't expect anything from you as a guest. All we would like for you to do is put the connect card in the offering plate as it passes today. That's one option. Another option is to say, hey, visit us at our welcome center, assuming you have something like that. We'd love to give you a free gift. Just to thank you for being a guest with us today and to welcome you to First Baptist Church. And then so sometimes they get turned in there. There might be other ways that they get turned in. You might have multiple ways in your church where things are getting turned in. And this is the problem, is that then they go this direction and this direction and this direction and this direction. So you need to have a plan for collecting all of them and them ending up in the right place. So once you have collected them and you have a good system for that, within one business day, you need to enter the information from the Connect card into some sort of a system. Ideally, you're not just using an Excel spreadsheet. Ideally, you have some sort of a database or church management software or something. I will talk about that a little bit later, but it needs to get put into something. And a great option is to consider a digital connection card. Our church just started doing this a few weeks ago. I thought it was brilliant. They have they put up a slide when they're welcoming guests and explaining the handwritten Connect cards. They say, hey, or you can just text guest to this number, and then it sends them a link, and they fill out the link, the little form on their phone, and then they get a gift for doing that. And so some people don't want to fill something out or don't have a pen or whatever, and they're happy to do it on their phone, and it's done. So there's lots of different ways. And the nice thing about that is that could theoretically automatically sync with some sort of a database. So be thinking through the practicality of getting it from Sunday morning into something that you can actually use it for your workflow. Step 2 is to match guest information with child check-in records. So a good cloud-based system is going to make this easier. I highly recommend Planning Center. I don't get paid for that, by the way. They don't have any sort of an affiliate program. But I just really, really like Planning Center. I think they're the best out there right now. So in terms of affordability, it's really inexpensive. It's great. It works really well. They have got lots of apps. If you're a smaller church, you can easily spend under $100 a month for church management software that's just A+ in Planning Center. And they're going to make something like this easier, because if you have a Connect card and you type in someone's name, it's going to automatically show you that, hey, Joe Smith had a kid that they checked in as a new person, Joey Smith, and that's going to help you understand that this is a family unit and not just there's a Joe Smith and then there's this other Joe Smith with a Joey Smith. Like it's making it easier for you. So what you want to do, the point of this is that you want to be sure you're not sending information out twice. That looks really bad on the church when you're sending something to Joe Smith and then you're sending something to Joe Smith again, and it's because they entered their information in 2 different places and you didn't have the system in place to see that it's the same person. The other thing that it does is it helps you to know that you need to do the child-centric component of the workflow, which we'll talk about in just a minute or two. So that's step 2, is you just want to make sure that you're connecting all the family in one spot in your database, whichever database you use. Step 3, handwrite a postcard in the week after they come to Christmas. I know it's going to be a busy week. People are going to be off a lot, but I can't emphasize this enough, that a handwritten card goes a long way. Don't call people, especially the week of Christmas. Like, don't call them. Really anytime. Right after someone visits, they don't want to get a phone call. They don't. That creeps people out. Like, they forgot that they gave you their phone number and they weren't expecting you to call. So don't call. Don't send an email if you can avoid it. Write them a postcard. People don't get stuff in the mail anymore, and they certainly don't get handwritten stuff in the mail anymore. And so have a volunteer. Doesn't need to be the pastor, shouldn't be secretary or admin. Have a volunteer whose volunteer job is write postcards to guests every week. Whoever was new, you write them a postcard. Joe Smith, so glad that you were a guest with us today at First Baptist Church. We loved having your family. We're here for you. If you need anything at all, blessings. And then don't sign it the church. Sign it as Susie. Like, just that goes a long way. You'd be surprised. That means a lot to people. Now, if you don't have their physical address, you can send them an email, but don't send them some form letter. Make it sound personal. Joe, hey, Joe, saw that you were a guest with us this week. Just wanted to welcome you to First Baptist Church. If you have any questions at all about the church, let me know. Otherwise, we're so glad that you visited, and we're so glad. Try to avoid the word visited. So glad that you were a guest with us. Would love to see you again next week. And then don't send that from the pastor. Send it from Susie, who it just means more to people when they get something that feels less formal than that. Step 4 is to mail the postcards. Now, this sounds like the same step as step 3, but it's not, because oftentimes it's a different person who sends the postcard than the person who writes the postcard. And this can be a breakdown. So someone writes the postcards, on a Tuesday, and then they don't get sent till Friday. That's a problem. So you need to have the system for, on Tuesday, postcards get written. On Wednesday, they get mailed out. And so make sure that's a defined step. Same thing with email. So if you don't have the postcard, make sure that they get sent at a certain time. Step 5, announce the date of your newcomer event. So we're going to talk a lot about an idea of a newcomer event today, but this would be something like a pizza with the pastor, or just having lunch after service, or having breakfast before service, some sort of event that's for guests, welcoming them to the church and telling them a little bit more about the church. And I'm just using the generic term newcomer event this is not a new member class. Okay. A new member class is somebody who's committing to being a part of your church, which is a great thing to have. But this is not that. This is welcoming somebody to your church and acquainting them with your church. And I'm using the term newcomer event to broadly cover the spectrum of what that could look like. And we'll talk more about that later. But you want to announce that newcomer event at your Christmas service. So you say, hey, if you're a guest with us today, we're so glad that you're here. On January X, we're going to have this newcomer event. We're going to be having lunch and this and that and the other, sort of describe it. And then you're going to continue to announce that every week until the event happens. Now, again, if you want to use the same assimilation process throughout the year, it just needs to become a regular habit to be talking about when this newcomer event is coming up next. Because, stealing this quote from Carey Nieuwhof, he says that every Sunday is somebody's first Sunday, right? And so if you have a newcomer event, it's for guests, and people in your church, they shouldn't get annoyed about hearing about a newcomer event, because they know that the church is only the church when it exists for others. That's what Bonhoeffer says. The church is only the church when it exists for others. So we're not annoyed that we're announcing another newcomer event. We're excited about the fact that we have newcomers. And if you are a newcomer, it's the first time that you're hearing about it. So just get in the habit of announcing when the next one is. You can host these every month. You could host them twice a quarter. You could host them once a quarter. But whatever you choose to do, just get in the habit of talking about when the next one is. So in a long-term assimilation process, just make that a part of normal practice for your church, inviting guests to come to the newcomer event. Step 6 is you're going to handwrite a letter or a postcard to kids, if they have kids, inviting them to some sort of a kid event, or even if it's just next Sunday's Sunday school class. You obviously only have to do this step if they have kids. But I have to tell you, my kids, I don't know about you and your kids, but my kids lose their minds if they get something in the mail. Like they just go nuts. They can't even handle it. They get so excited when there's something in the mail that's addressed to them. It's so rare. And so if you send something in the mail, handwritten, to the kids, it's over. Those kids are so excited. So invite them to something that's happening at the church. It doesn't have to be a special event. It really can just be, hey, Billy, we'd love to see you at Sunday school next week, because we're going to be doing a marshmallow eating contest. Like, just invite them to something. And a great way to do this is to get the volunteers who work in the class in the habit of writing postcards to kids who are guests that Sunday. So if little Billy shows up in the second grade class on a Sunday before Mrs. Jones leaves the room to go to worship or to leave for the day to go to Cracker Barrel, she needs to write a little postcard, just a few sentences, to Billy. Billy, so glad you were such a fun kid. So glad that you were in our class today. Love to see you next week because we're having a marshmallow contest. We'd love to see you on January X because we're having a pizza party. Whatever it is, invite the kid to that. This is really fundamentally powerful. We go to church about 20, 25 minutes away from where I live. But there's a church that's about 5 minutes away from where I live that does a great trunk or treat. And so every year, rather than drive 25 minutes to our church that also has a trunk or treat, we usually go to the one that's 5 minutes away from us. I know that's terrible to admit, but I have to tell you, my 2-year-old, she's almost 3. This is the first year. She's been a couple of times already to this trunk or treat thing at this church, but this is the first year that she was really into it. And I got to tell you, like every day, because we drive past this church all the time, every day in November when we drive past the church, she'd say, "There's trunk or treat, there's trunk or treat, there's trunk or treat." Like it's stuck in her brain. Now imagine if that church had gone through, and they got our information, by the way, if they had taken the next step and actually sent something to Nora, to my daughter, in the mail, I would never hear the end of it. All it would be is, I want to go to that trunk or treat church. And so this isn't manipulative. This is just a great way to connect with families. Invite the kids. So I really want to emphasize this step. It might be one of the most critical steps in the process. Obviously, if they don't have kids, it's a different story. Step 7, you mail the postcard, right? So this is, again, if you, it's a different person who's writing and mailing usually. And so you want to be sure you've got a good system for when the cards get written and when they get sent. You want to send them on week 2, because they're already getting a postcard in the mail week 1, just to the family in general or to the grown-ups. And so you want to send the postcard on week 2. And that way you're sort of staggering the contacts. Step 8, this is when you write the email, right? So now that you've sent the snail mail twice, one to the parents, one to the kids, week 3 is a good time to send an email. So the email should come from the pastor's email account. He didn't have to write it. It could come from an admin or from a volunteer. But it does need to come from the pastor's email account, and it should be personalized and non-designed. And so what I mean by that is it shouldn't just say, "Hey," it should say, "Hey, Joe." And then it doesn't need to be long, but it shouldn't have lots of pictures in it. Here's why. Emails with lots of pictures in it either get flagged as spam, 1, or 2, they will get sorted into the promotions folder in Gmail or other email softwares, which is just one step above spam. People lots of times don't check their promotions folder. And so your best shot at it getting sorted into your regular email is for it not to have a lot of text. You'll just freely admitting this is why you'll see less and less pictures in emails from the Malphurs group, is because we know that a lot of our emails get sorted into your promotions folder. And even if you wanted to read them, and I'm not saying that you necessarily want to, but even if you wanted to, you might not see it. And so we're trying to give ourselves the best chance of communicating with you by limiting the number of pictures that we have in emails. And so you want to do the same thing. Email from the pastor that is not a designed email. And it should be short and just focusing on inviting them to the newcomer event. Hey, next Sunday, we have this event. We would love to see you there. Then in the days leading up to that newcomer event, so in the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, leading up to the Sunday where you actually have the newcomer event, this is when you call. And again, this can be a volunteer, should be a volunteer. They have a list of folks who have been coming this last month, and you're inviting them to show up to this event. You want to emphasize that no RSVP is required. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes, but I really believe that you shouldn't have an RSVP for a lot of reasons that we'll talk about in a few minutes. But you just call them up and say, "Hey, Joe, we're really glad that you came to First Baptist Church. Wanted to remind you," because at this point they will have heard about it in a couple of different ways. "Want to remind you we have our Pizza with the Pastors coming up this Sunday. We'd love for you to come. Don't feel like you have to RSVP, but it's going to be kid-friendly." So you either say, "We're having childcare," or you say, "Kids are welcome. It's going to be a kid-friendly environment, stuff for kids to do." Because that's a reason why people don't show up to these kinds of things. They either assume that there's going to not be childcare, or that it wouldn't be good for their family or whatever. So say, "Hey, it's going to be great for kids. Love to have you. It's only going to be 45 minutes or whatever the time is." And then hang up, because they're probably not going to answer anyway. Just leave a voicemail, but you've called them and you've invited them, and that that matter something. It's not creepy at week 4. If they've gotten something in the mail from you and they've gotten an email from you, a phone call is not creepy. If you start with the phone call, it's creepy. But by week 4, it's not creepy. Step 10 is now, this is the final piece of the puzzle here. You need to actually have this newcomer event. And in it, you should be sharing your church's identity and mission and vision. And you need to have signups at this event for the next step. So if you want them to join a small group or join a class or whatever, have that next step laid out for them, show them why they need to take that next step. And don't tell them, oh, log on to the website later after today, and then you can sign up online. No, like have physical signups for them that you pass around that they can't ignore. Do it in some way where they can't just push it off to later. And so you're giving yourself the best chance that they sign up for the next step. Have a very clear call to action. Don't give them 15 options. You could come to this or this or this or this or this or this. Lay out what you want the next step for a guest to be, whether that's join a small group or join a class or go to a new member class or whatever it is that you want that next step to be. Define what that is, and that be the only thing you ask them to do. And then that way, again, you're increasing the odds that they actually take that next step. And then this way, you're passing off someone from the guest category to somewhere where they can actually be shepherded. Because at this point, you're just sort of shuffling them along until you can get them into something where they can actually be known and cared for. Again, stealing this quote from Carey Nieuwhof, because it's a good one. The idea is that you don't want to necessarily have a church where everybody knows everybody. You want to have a church where everybody is known. I've worked with churches that are small, and I've worked with churches that are big. And the reality is, not that long ago, I walked into a smaller church, and not a person said hi to me, not a person greeted me, not a one. Well, actually, to be fair, one person did. That they had met me in the weekend prior, so they kind of knew who I was. But maybe if she hadn't known who I was, I don't know that they ever would have said anything to me. And this was a small church. So there's an assumption that we have a family feel when we're a small church. The reality is you might not, because having a family feel is actually a cultural reality of your church. It has almost nothing to do with the size. You could suggest that it's easier to have a family feel in a small church. That might be true. But just because you're small, it doesn't mean you have a family feel. And so you're wanting to create a situation where everybody is known. Whether you're a big church or a small church, you actually have to do this intentionally. It doesn't happen on accident. It doesn't just happen as a byproduct of the fact that you are small. And so this is the point of the newcomer event, is that we're trying to get them out of this unknown category to known, that we met them at this event. We're passing them off now to the next step, and they're growing, and we can actually disciple them from here. So I want to give you some tips for a newcomer event, because this might be something. Actually, I'm going to run another poll here. How many of you actually have some sort of a newcomer event, whether that be pizza with the pastor or something like that, that you run, whether that be once a month or once a quarter? Doesn't really matter. Do you have something like that right now? While you guys are answering that, because I'm really interested, I want to just make it one more pitch for Planning Center. One of the nice things about Planning Center is that they actually have a workflow function, so that you can you can put somebody into the system, and then that you can have predefined workflows so that they can't move along until they hit their next step. So, and then when they hit the next step, a person who's responsible for that step gets an alert. So if you're the person who writes the postcards, you get an email saying, here are the people who need to get postcards written to them this week. And so, and then they can't move on to the next step until you've done your task. This is a situation where technology can really help you get better at relating to people and connecting with people. So I really, again, I don't get anything for promoting them. I really wish that I did, because I promote them all the time. But 30,000 churches are using them right now, and there's a reason why, over 30,000. It's because they're really affordable, and it's really great software. So even if you're not using Planning Center, I think some of the other church management software has this function, you'll look into that. Look into the idea of using technology and having predefined workflows within your church management software that will help you. All right, so almost 60% of you said that no, you don't have any sort of a newcomer event, and about 40% of you said that you do have one. So that's good information. So even if you have one, this information is going to be, these tips will be useful for you. If you don't have one, they'll be especially useful to you. So when you're planning your newcomer event, you want to determine the schedule and the feel of the event. So is it going to happen before church or after church? After church is usually better because you have a better shot at catching people. Is it going to be inside or outside? Well, if you're hosting one in January, it's probably going to be inside. Unless you're in Southern California, then by all means, do it outside. Are you going to provide childcare? If not, it needs to be child-friendly. Have coloring pages for them. Like, make the food something that kids actually want to eat. Think through the child situation. How long is it going to be? I recommend it should be short. It doesn't need to be an hour and a half deal. If you're going to serve food, what kind is it going to be? Being aware of allergies and gluten and yada yada. Are you going to have a formal presentation or not? And how long is that going to be? Someone going to get up and talk about the church? Are they going to drone on and on and on for an hour, or is you going to keep it pretty quick and short and to the point? You want to think through those things. Another tip here is don't require an RSVP. We've talked a little bit about this, but now I want to sort of make my pitch for it. The reason is, if you have an RSVP, the benefit of an RSVP is that people feel like responsibility for showing up. So, we signed up to go, so we need to go. That would be the one benefit. That everything else is sort of a benefit for not having one. One, it feels less formal. Like, it feels like a lot less pressure. Like, oh, we can go. Yeah, it's fine. We can just show up. Number two, you can catch people who are new that very week. So if you have no RSVP and you have a new guest the week that you're actually having the newcomer event, you can just invite them that day. Say, hey, we're having pizza after the service with pastor and staff. We'd love for you to come. There's no RSVP required. We're going to have childcare. You're welcome to just show up. That helps with that. And then again, you're not tracking down people and hounding them. So when you're following up with guests, you're inviting them to something and it feels like fun versus feels like, hey, I really need to know if you're going to come. I really need you to RSVP whether or not you're showing up. That creates a pressure situation that can be uncomfortable. So my pitch is don't do an RSVP. So then that way you want to plan your food to be something that will keep. And by keep, I just mean till Wednesday, because the students will gladly eat whatever leftover food you have, or college kids if you have some of those too. Also, it's easier than you might think to plan for food. So that would be pushback people have as well. How are we going to know how much food to get? It's not that hard, because you know how many guests that you contacted. You have a pretty good feel for how many guests might show up randomly. Within a margin of error, you're going to know how much food you need. And then you just kind of over-plan by just a hair, knowing that you're going to pass along any extra food to students anyway. And then obviously you let people come even at the last minute. So it's their very first Sunday, they can show up. I already mentioned this, but this is really important. Be certain that you have a planned next step. So as a part of the event, make it easy for guests. You want to make it really, really, really easy. Again, if you give them lots of options, we think that options are a good thing. It's not. There's a reason why people like Five Guys and In-N-Out more than they like McDonald's, because obviously the quality of the food is one thing, but also you're not overwhelmed by menu choices. It's like, do you want a burger, or a burger? Cheese, no cheese, double? I mean, like, those are your options, not do you want a fish sandwich, chicken sandwich, a burger, a salad? Like, people sometimes get paralyzed by all the choices, especially when it's something that's brand new. And so when you, in this kind of situation, just tell them, here's the next step that we want you to take. Take it or don't take it. That's sort of their only choice is, am I going to take the next step or am I not going to take the next step? And again, this way you're handing off guests into a discipleship pathway where they can be known and identified and ultimately discipled. Keep it simple and keep it fun. So this should not feel like a formal event. The point's to get people introduced to your church in a way that you would if they were guests in your house. So, if you had somebody over to your house, you probably wouldn't be, opening up the projector and not that you can't have slides if you want. That's not the point. But you wouldn't make it feel really rigid and formal. You would be like, hey, sit down on the couch. Here, would you like a cup of coffee? Like, it would feel natural. And you want this event to feel that way too. Even if you have some structural things to it, it should feel natural. And then another thing is just ask them questions. So you'll want your whole staff to attend this event, even if you're a small church, ministry directors, even if they're volunteers, doesn't matter. But what you want to avoid having happen is having those people clumped together so that all the staff or all the volunteers sit at one table, and then all the guests are sitting at another table. Like, make it a rule that you have to intersperse and sit with someone you don't know. And ask them questions rather than just talking about the church. Tell me about your job. Tell me about your kids. People like to talk about themselves, and it's a great way to actually connect with them. If you spend the whole time just telling them about the church, they may or may not connect. But if you intentionally leave lots of time to learn about them and to listen to them, that's a good thing. Get help if you need it. If all of this is completely overwhelming, that's fine. Call us. Okay, I'm not gonna start charging you by the minute if you say, hey, we need some help figuring out how to do a newcomer event. We'd love to chat with you about it. That's why we exist. We're a nonprofit organization that equips churches to break through barriers and maximize their impact. So if you've got questions about this, let us help you. This is just a piece of the puzzle, right? So I just want to walk through this because if we want to see guests assimilated, we want to see Christmas guests turn into regular attenders, we got to know what exactly are we bringing them into? Are we bringing them into something that's healthy? So I'm talking about at a newcomer event, talking about your mission and your values and your vision. Well, do you have that? Do you have a mission statement that's not just printed in your bulletin and on your website, but it's something that you're actually living out? Do you know what your values are? Do you know where you're headed as a church, your vision? Do you have a clear picture for what that looks like? That's compelling to people. If you're not hitting that 5% number on a regular basis in newcomers, do you have a strategy for reaching your community with the gospel, going out to people and not just expecting them to come in? You're talking about having a next step for guests to take. Well, do you have a disciple-making strategy? Like, do you have a pathway that you know what it looks like to see somebody grow from an unbeliever into a mature believer? How are you bringing people along? Mobilization, are you struggling? If you think about the idea of having a volunteer step up and write postcards, that might be overwhelming to you if you're already burning out all of your volunteers. And so you might have a problem in your church where people are viewing church as a spectator sport. Staffing strategy, this is about understanding who's going to be in charge of what and having a blueprint for staffing, both paid staff and volunteer staff. I was just working with a church this past weekend, and as we were going through things, they're several months into their strategic planning process, but just this past weekend, they identified a huge critical staffing gap for them, a leadership gap, that they've realized that they're going to have to fill that in with a volunteer. But as the church grows and they have the funds available to fill that with a paid person, whereas before they might have hired reactively and thought, well, we need to just pick something that makes more sense, or I've read a book that says we need to hire a guy that does this. Now they know exactly what's critical for them, and they're going to hire strategically instead of reactively. Finance strategy. A lot of you might have attended our Build a Better Budget webinar that was in October. That's one piece of the puzzle is how you build the budget. Deeper than that is growing the finances of the church. Your facility. So I didn't say this before, but I want to say it now. The reason why someone stays at your church has very little to do with what happens in your service. It has more to do with a follow-up process and what you do after the service. That's what makes people stick. People probably come for the music or for a communicator or something like that, but they stay for relationships. That's why people stay at churches. And so, but that doesn't mean that your facility and your guest experience don't matter, because those are often a reason why someone will come in the first place. And so that's sort of step zero, so to speak, is you want to make sure the environment is right. And so we want to look at that. And then leadership development. How do you take somebody who's a 16-year-old kid who just became a Christian, and one day they can be a small group leader or a staff person even, or maybe even an elder or deacon in your church? Like, do you have a process lined out for growing that kid up over years that's not just accidental? Like, well, he just kept going here for 30 years, and so he got to become an elder. Like, that's not how it should work. Like, we should be intentionally maturing and growing people up, not only as disciples, but also as leaders. And so these are the 10 things that we look at when we look at a health of a church. And so we want to let you take advantage of a free tool called the Church Checkup. It's completely free. This is not a sales pitch. This is just a tool, because you got to know what you're inviting people into. What are you assimilating them into? Are you assimilating them into a healthy situation or not? And so this is not an auto-generated report. The good of that, well, the bad of that is that you don't fill this out and you instantly get a report. The good of it is there's a spot for you to even add some context and stuff of your situation. A TMG consultant sits down with every single one of these things that comes in, and we do a custom report for every person and follow up with you individually. And so I think that's good. I think it's worth waiting a couple of days to get something that's personal versus something that's just, a computer did for you. So if you're interested in figuring out, where are my blind spots? Like, where are our weaknesses as a church? Where are these things that we're not sure if we're healthy, and what we would be assimilating people into? This is anonymous on your end, but on our end, we'll know if you're interested in this. And so if you would like to take advantage of that church checkup, let me know, and we'll follow up with you individually. And again, it's completely free. There's no charge to that. We just want to help churches figure out, are we healthy or not healthy, or do we need to work on that? Everyone will get a link to it, but if you say yes, you're interested, we'll follow up with you personally and say, hey, let's chat and get you started on the church checkup. And that's available all the time at malphursgroup.com/check. So no worries if you missed that. If you're watching this recording and you're going, I didn't do the poll, no problem. malphursgroup.com/check. It's up and open all the time. All right. So I want to answer questions. I see there's 3. I'll answer these first, and then if you guys have any questions about assimilation process or church checkup, or why I have brown hair, anything, I'll be happy to answer them. Let's see. Can you give some example of newcomer events? Yes. So pizza with the pastor would be one. You could do that right after church. That's a sort of a one you hear a lot. Another one would be like a welcome class, where you maybe do it during Sunday school hour for new guests. Again, people are usually attracted to food. Our church does something that's just like donuts right after the service. It's not a full meal. It's something that's just sort of finger food, and it's really short. It's only like 30 minutes or something like that. So it doesn't really matter. But you can pick something that works for you and works in your context. So those would be some examples. What is the name of the software? Planning Center Online, PCO. I think planning.center or if you just put in Google Planning Center, it'll show up. And they even have a pricing calculator, so you can know exactly what it would cost for your church to use. But for a small church, it's usually under $100 a month, and you will get that back in terms of usefulness tenfold. Good question. What are other options instead of a newcomer event? I don't know that you should have another option. I think if you don't have a newcomer event, you need to start planning one. And again, you don't necessarily have to do it every month, but for this Christmas time, it'd be smart to plan one for January to catch your Christmas guests. And see how it goes. Evaluate it. Figure out what worked, what didn't work. And then if you want to come up with something really innovative and different after that, then do that. But I would plan a newcomer event, there's value in beta testing things. Like, so if you don't know if something's going to work for your church long term, don't commit to it. Don't get up in front of people and say, hey, we're going to do pizza with the pastor on January, whatever. And then we're going to do it every month after that. There's no reason to commit to that. Just say, we're going to do pizza with the pastor January, whatever, and then see how that goes. And if it went great, tell people we're going to do it again. And if it didn't go great, it can just die quietly into the night and you can figure out what works for you. So there's not a need. We overcommit lots of times, and then churches will say things like, well, we tried that once and it didn't work, or we tried things and people didn't follow through. It's oftentimes because we oversell it and say, we're gonna do this thing for forever. Why? Commit to doing it one time, see how it works, evaluate it, and then try something different. But that's a good question. How to check in late? Yes, this will be available to download later on. I think we'll send it tomorrow. What type of items do you recommend to put in the gift bag? That's a great question. That's a really good question. What kind of things would you like to get in a gift bag? That's the question I'd ask. What would you not be like, great, another fill in the blank, another pen, another cup? What? I wouldn't put in, 18 pages about your church, because no one's going to read that. I've gotten that before at a church that I was visiting. That was overwhelming. So I'm not saying don't put any information about your church in there, but maybe just one postcard. And then something that people like. You could put in a CD with some music. You could, not a burn CD of someone else's music illegally, but if your church has some recorded music or a sermon, you could put in a cup if you think people like cups. Whatever it is that you think. T-shirts often are popular. Usually people don't hate getting T-shirts, because if nothing else, they'll use it as a yard shirt. So, think about, this is a good brainstorming thing, right? So, ask your team, what would you not be annoyed about getting in a gift bag? And then the other question to follow that up with is, what can we afford? What does the follow-up process look like exactly? Phone call from who? How long does the follow-up process last until they are plugged in? So you're going to follow the 10 steps. If you can catch them into the newcomer event, they've only been coming 2 weeks, and then they come to the newcomer event, that would sort of end it. That would be sort of the end of the process for a person. If they come in, and then the very next week is a newcomer event and they don't show up at that, you're sort of following all 10 steps. I know it's kind of confusing, but this is where software will help you, because if you have software that tells you where they are at, you're not thinking about multiple layers of timelines. Like, each person is getting tracked individually, and that can be just monumentally helpful. As far as a phone call, like, I do a phone call from a volunteer whose job is to call people, to invite them to things. I'm glad you asked, how long does the follow-up process take? So again, you're following all 10 steps, but some people will plug in and never show up to a newcomer event. Like at our church that we go to, we started going there 2 years ago. We never went to the newcomer event. Like, they have it, but we never went. We plugged in before that. So people might get a postcard in the mail or an email, and then that's all they need to connect. And they were so happy they got it and they loved it and they stayed. But you sort of have those steps for people who are sort of dragging along, and hopefully you catch them at the newcomer event. If people only give their email address or phone number on a Connect card, how would you follow up with them? So you replace, don't cold. I find cold calls intimidating and awkward. So do the people who receive them. So don't do them. You email them. So if you can mail the postcard, mail the postcard. This is, again, if you require a physical address for a child who gets checked in, then you can get the physical address that way, even if they don't fill it out on the Connect card. And people aren't going to be weird about that when they're checking in their kid. Like, they'll feel like that's normal, and so they'll do that. So you can get it that way. I really recommend that. But if you don't have a physical address, you only have an email address and a phone number, you email them. I would email them, but just make it a personal email that's short and not from the pastor, from a volunteer. Hi, this is Susie. Glad you visited. One of the ladies in our church makes cookies, and then a volunteer delivers them. Thoughts? Is this creepy? It can be creepy, but it can be creepy. It doesn't have to be creepy, especially if you maybe, I don't know. I would ask some people who have received them and that you trust, and be like, did you find this creepy? Like anything else in the church, I would just evaluate it and go, is this working? Because it's a lot of effort for something that doesn't work. If it doesn't work, if it works, great, keep doing it. But if you're not seeing any results from it, then why keep doing it? Other than the fact that someone's been doing it for the last 10 years, and so we've got to keep doing it. No, you don't. There's no rule that says you got to keep doing it if it doesn't work. So I don't know if it's creepy. If I got cookies from our church after we visited, I'd be like, oh, they came to my house. Like, I hadn't mowed my yard. I don't know. I don't know. It could be creepy, but you should just ask some people and get their feedback from it. And then, but the biggest thing is measure how effective it is. Did people actually start coming to the church because they got cookies? If the answer is yes, then it's working and you keep doing it. Even members only make it to church on average. Yeah, that's true. Your plan is weekly, but folks don't typically come for 4 weeks in a row. Yes. What do you suggest as a workaround for this? I'm assuming we've built this assimilation plan based off of an assumption that they may only show up just the one time. And so, yeah, your chances of them showing up to the newcomer event are manifold more likely if they come more than just the 1 week. But the assimilation plan is built off of the assumption that they may only come that one time, and you're constantly just trying to get them to come back, and then using that newcomer event as bait to get them to show up. So you keep going through the steps regardless of whether or not they show up at week 2 or 3. Good question. What does it mean to be plugged in? A church consultant once said to plug them into a volunteer team instead of a small group. Yeah, that can work. How does the discipleship process then work? Should they be plugged into both a volunteer spot and a small group? So, yeah, this is fundamentally a question about the discipleship pathway. So this is something that we work on with churches. We ask the question, what does a mature believer look like? And we spend a whole weekend diving into scripture and mapping this out and trying to figure it out. And so this becomes a natural question, or the answer to that question becomes natural when you have a defined pathway. Like when you say, this is what a mature believer looks like, then you know what is that next step. And at some churches, that is a volunteer position. And sometimes that's a small group, and sometimes that's a Sunday school class. But you have to know for your church, what is it that we have defined as this is what a mature disciple looks like? And then what are we doing at our church that actually makes people become a mature disciple? And then you're plugging them in means you're getting them into that first step in that discipleship pathway. And if that's volunteering, great. If that's small group, great. But again, this speaks to the fundamental issue of, do we have a discipleship pathway? And if the answer to that is no, then we really need to have that discussion first. Not me and you necessarily, but maybe I would love to talk to you about it individually. In your opinion, is a personal visit an antiquated ministry strategy? Especially unscheduled. I would say an unscheduled personal visit is an antiquated ministry strategy. It can creep people out. It feels sort of like Jehovah's Witnessy, sort of Mormon-y. It's like, oh, you're just showing up at my house. So people are weird about that anymore. And so, yeah, I would say largely that's an antiquated ministry strategy. I would follow that up with, having a personal relationship with somebody is not antiquated and is ultimately the goal. And so if you're using other means to create a personal relationship with them, you would call it a real win if you have enough relational collateral built up where you could have a personal meeting with somebody, maybe at a coffee shop, not at their house, or something like that. So I would call a personal visit as an end goal a win, but you wouldn't want to jump there to begin with, because people might find that weird, creepy. All right. I think that was all the questions that we got in. Are there any other questions? You guys can submit them. Otherwise, I'll say this. I will follow up. All of you that said, 73% of you said that you wanted to take advantage of that church checkup, and we'll follow up with you individually. And then everybody who registered will get, whether you showed up live or whether you're seeing this in recording, you'll get a link to watch the recording. You will get the notes. We also have the all 10 steps in like a checklist, 1-page checklist that you can use, so you can figure out when is our due date for this, and who is going to be responsible for it. It's just a good tool for you to map it out, all on one page. You'll get that. You'll get these notes, and you'll get the link to the slides, or the presentation, I mean the video, and then you'll also get a link to the church checkup. So everybody will get that link, just in case we catch anybody on the other end. Are there any other questions I can answer? Oh, what does the Sunday morning experience look like? This is a really good question, and I could spend a whole webinar just on that, and then actually love to do that sometime. That's a deeper question that I think I can answer right here, but follow up with me individually. You know who you are. I don't want to say your name, call you out, but yeah, let's chat one-on-one. Are the slides available? Yes. So we'll put them in a PDF form. We ask you not to share those, but we will give you the slides in the email that will come to you tomorrow. All right. Well, thank you, guys. We're going to wrap up, and let me just pray to close us out, and thank the Lord for you guys. Jesus, thank you so much for today. Thank you so much for an opportunity to connect with pastors and leaders all across the United States who want to get better at reaching guests and connecting them into their churches and seeing them grow, not only hear about the gospel and accept the gospel, but to grow and to become mature believers and mature disciples. I thank you for their willingness to spend an hour learning some of this and getting better. And I pray that you will use this training for them to help them, and also for that they can spark good conversation with their teams and contextualizing this and applying it to their own situation. I just thank you, and I pray blessings over each and every church represented today, both here live and those who will watch this in the recording. We ask your blessing on today and on this Christmas season. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you guys so much. Have a great rest of your day.